War does not choose saints. It breaks them. It drags ordinary men into extraordinary violence and asks how far they are willing to go to survive. But once in a generation, war encounters a man who refuses to bend. A man who steps into hell carrying no weapon, no hatred, and no desire to destroy, only an unshakable belief that every life has value. That man was Desmond Doss. While millions of soldiers learned to pull the trigger, Desmond Doss made a decision that seemed impossible in the middle of World War II. He would never fire a weapon. He would never take a human life. And yet, he would walk into the most brutal battlefields of the Pacific Theater and emerge as one of the greatest heroes in American military history. Today, on War Heroes, we tell the definitive story of Desmond Doss, the man who fought the bloodiest war in human history, armed only with faith, courage, and compassion. Desmond Thomas Doss was born on the 7th of February, 1919, in Lynchburg, Virginia. He grew up in a modest household during a time when hardship was common and opportunity was scarce. His father, William Doss, was a carpenter and a veteran of World War I, a man haunted by memories he could never fully escape. Like many veterans of his generation, he returned home carrying invisible wounds, anger, trauma, and pain that often surfaced through alcohol and violence. Desmond's mother, Bertha, was the spiritual anchor of the family. A devout Seventh-day Adventist, she raised her children on the belief that life was sacred and that God's commandments were absolute. From her, Desmond learned the words that would guide his entire life. Thou shalt not kill. And then stand on the go, into do, sample is into do. One moment in his childhood would define everything that followed. During a violent argument between his parents, young Desmond watched in horror as his mother grabbed a revolver and pointed it at his father. Frozen with fear, Desmond intervened just in time to prevent tragedy. That image, the barrel of a gun aimed at a human being, burned itself into his memory. From that day forward, Desmond made a quiet but unbreakable vow. No matter what the world demanded of him, he would never take a life. Before the war ever tested him, Desmond Doss had already fought his first battles inside his own home and within his own heart. Growing up during the Great Depression, he learned early what it meant to endure hardship without complaint. Money was scarce, food was limited, and tension often filled the house. Yet through it all, Desmond clung to the lessons his mother taught him: patience, humility, and absolute faith. Unlike many boys his age, Desmond was not drawn to violence or competition. He avoided fights, even when mocked or provoked. Neighbors and classmates often saw him as strange, too gentle, too quiet, too unwilling to assert himself. But beneath that calm exterior was a will of iron. His beliefs were not weakness. They were immovable pillars. As he grew older, Desmond struggled deeply with the idea of war. He believed in defending others, in standing against evil, but he could not reconcile those ideas with killing. This inner conflict would define his life. He prayed constantly, asking for guidance, not for safety. He did not ask God to spare him from war, only to show him how to walk through it without losing his soul. When the United States was thrust into World War II after the attack on Pearl Harbor, the nation called upon its young men to fight. Desmond felt that call as strongly as anyone. He wanted to serve his country. He wanted to protect others, but he could not violate his conscience. He would not carry a rifle. He would not learn to kill. Instead, he chose a path that placed him in just as much danger. He enlisted as a combat medic in the U.S. Army. From the moment he entered basic training, Desmond was an outsider. His refusal to handle weapons was seen not as courage, but as cowardice. Fellow soldiers mocked him relentlessly. Officers viewed him as a problem, a liability in a system built around obedience and force. He was insulted, beaten, and even threatened by men who believed he had no place in the army. The pressure intensified when Desmond refused to train on Saturdays, honoring his Sabbath. He was written up, punished, and nearly court-martialed. At one point, the army attempted to discharge him for refusing direct orders, but the law protected his status as a conscientious objector, and against their will, the army was forced to keep him. So Desmond Doss went to war. But before he ever reached the battlefield, Desmond had to survive something almost as brutal: his own army. Basic training became a daily trial of endurance, not of physical pain alone, but of isolation. His fellow soldiers believed that a man who would not carry a rifle was endangering everyone around him. To them, his faith was not admirable, it was dangerous. Desmond was routinely singled out. He was assigned the hardest duties, denied privileges, and publicly humiliated. At night, while others slept, he knelt beside his bunk and prayed. Even his boots were thrown at him, and insults echoed through the barracks. More than once, he was beaten in the dark by men who believed they were delivering justice. Officers attempted to break him. They ordered him to touch a rifle, to train, to conform. When he refused, they threatened prison. A court-martial loomed. For most men, this would have been the breaking point. For Desmond, it was simply another test. He stood alone in military court, calm and respectful, explaining that he wanted to serve not as a killer, but as a healer. The law, reluctantly, stood on his side. The army could not remove him, and so, against their will, they sent him into combat. His unit was deployed to the Pacific Theater, where the fighting was savage, close, and unforgiving. In places like Guam and Leyte, Desmond ran directly into gunfire to treat wounded soldiers. Without a weapon to defend himself, he crawled through mud, smoke, and blood to reach men screaming for help. He treated anyone he found, friend or enemy alike. To Desmond, a wounded man was simply a life that needed saving, but nothing compared to what awaited him in 1945 on the island of Okinawa. The Battle of Okinawa would become one of the deadliest engagements of World War II. At its center stood a towering escarpment known as Hacksaw Ridge. Japanese forces had transformed the ridge into a fortress riddled with caves, machine gun nests, and artillery positions. To reach the top, American soldiers had to climb exposed cargo nets while under constant enemy fire. Once they reached the summit, they entered a nightmare. Explosions tore the earth apart. Machine gun fire cut men down where they stood. The ground became a maze of bodies, blood, and broken equipment, casualties mounted by the hour. Hacksaw Ridge was not just a battlefield, it was a slaughterhouse. The Japanese defenders had spent months preparing the terrain, carving tunnels and hidden firing positions into the rock itself. The Americans never knew where death would come from. A step forward could trigger a grenade. A moment of silence could hide a machine gun waiting to open fire. The psychological toll was overwhelming. Men who had survived years of combat broke down here. The constant screams of the wounded mixed with the thunder of artillery and the suffocating smell of smoke and blood. There was no cover, no safety, and no mercy. Desmond moved through this chaos like a ghost. He ignored bullets snapping past his head. He crawled toward explosions instead of away from them. Time and again, he exposed himself to enemy fire to reach another fallen soldier. Many later said they could not understand how he did it. Desmond himself had a simple answer. Fear no longer mattered. Only duty did. During one of the fiercest assaults, Desmond's unit was ordered to retreat. Overwhelmed and nearly destroyed, the surviving soldiers descended the ridge, leaving behind dozens of wounded men who could not move on their own. Desmond Doss stayed. Alone on the ridge, surrounded by enemy forces, he began moving through the battlefield. He dragged wounded soldiers out of the open. He treated shattered limbs. He whispered prayers into the ears of men who believed they were about to die. One by one, he carried them to the edge of the cliff. Using a rope he found nearby, Desmond devised a way to lower the wounded down the steep face of Hacksaw Ridge. After each man disappeared safely into the darkness below, Desmond knelt and prayed the same words. Please, Lord, help me save just one more. Hour after hour, under constant fire, he continued. Bullets tore through his uniform. Explosions knocked him to the ground. Yet somehow, he was never hit. By the time the fighting subsided, Desmond Doss had saved approximately 75 men single-handedly. His actions stunned everyone. The same soldiers who once called him a coward now refused to go into battle unless he was with them. Officers who had doubted him entrusted their lives to his care. Desmond was wounded multiple times in subsequent fighting. A grenade blast tore into his leg, yet he refused treatment until others were cared for. Later, a sniper's bullet shattered his arm. With no one else available, He used the stock of a rifle, the weapon he would never fire, to splint his arm and crawled hundreds of yards to safety. For his extraordinary heroism at Okinawa, Desmond Doss was awarded the Medal of Honor, President Harry S. Truman personally presented the medal, later stating that he considered it a greater honor to award it than to be President of the United States. After the war, Desmond returned home, permanently disabled. He suffered from severe tuberculosis, lost part of a lung, and lived with constant pain. The war had taken its toll, but it had never broken his spirit. Desmond never sought recognition. He never considered himself a hero. When asked how he did what he did, he gave the same simple answer every time. God did it. I just tried to help. In the years following the war, Desmond Doss became a quiet symbol of something the world desperately needed to remember. At a time when heroism was defined by kill counts and battlefield dominance, he represented a different kind of strength. Schools invited him to speak. Veterans sought him out. Young soldiers listened in silence as he described courage without hatred. Despite his Medal of Honor, Desmond lived modestly. He struggled with his health, endured years of treatment, and relied on his faith to carry him through. He never glorified war. In every interview, he emphasized that the true heroes were the men who never came home. His story challenged the very definition of what it means to be a warrior. Desmond Doss died in 2006 at the age of 87. He was buried with military honors, remembered not for the lives he took, but for the lives he saved. His story stands as a powerful reminder that true courage is not found in violence, but in conviction. That even in the darkest chapters of human history, one man's compassion can shine brighter than the fires of war. Desmond Doss did not fight to kill. He fought to save. And in doing so, he became one of the greatest heroes the world has ever known. If you enjoyed this incredible story, subscribe to War Heroes for more tales of extraordinary courage, sacrifice, and humanity. Until next time.